Story 1. The Hinterkaifeck Murders. It began in silence. A silence so deep it swallowed the forest that surrounded the little Bavarian farmhouse. 6 people lived at the Hinterkaifeck homestead in the spring of 1922, a modest, isolated farmstead nestled between the towns of Ingolstadt and Schrobenhausen in southern Germany. And for a few days that March, the neighbors began to notice something odd. The usually predictable rhythm of life at Hinterkaifeck, the smoke rising from the chimney, the animals being fed, the children walking to school, stopped without warning. But no one said anything at first. It was a different time. People kept to themselves. That is, until the mailman noticed the mailbox overflowing. Then a mechanic arrived, called by the farm's patriarch, Andreas Gruber, days earlier, about a broken machine. No one answered the door, but the barn animals were fed, and the dog barked from inside. The mechanic found the farm quiet. Too quiet. Still, he fixed the machine and left. It wasn't until April 4th, 1922, that a group of concerned townspeople entered the farm and made a gruesome discovery in the barn: 4 bodies covered in hay. Soon, 2 more would be found inside the home. What happened at Hinterkaifeck is one of the most baffling and disturbing unsolved murder cases in German history. And despite over a century of investigation, speculation and rumor, no one has ever been arrested. The mystery only grows darker the more you look into it. Before we walk into the snow-covered courtyard of the Hinterkaifeck farmstead, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. It helps support more calm, slow-paced documentaries like this, and it builds a great community of curious listeners just like you. Let's begin with the people who lived there. Andreas Gruber was 63 years old. He owned the farm and was known around the village as a bitter, difficult man. His wife, Cecilia, was 72, quiet, dutiful, and weary. Living with them was their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, 35 years old, along with Victoria's 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. Rounding out the household was a maid named Maria Baumgartner, who had just arrived, literally the day of the murders. The Grubers had a reputation, not a good one. Andreas was abusive, both physically and emotionally. There were long-standing rumors in the village that he had an incestuous relationship with his daughter Victoria, even resulting in the birth of her son Joseph. A court had once investigated those claims, and both Andreas and Victoria had served brief prison time because of it. But nothing was ever officially proven. The child's true paternity remained a mystery, with some claiming Joseph was the son of Victoria's deceased husband, and others pointing to a local man named Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Lorenz, a widower himself, had been romantically linked to Victoria after her husband's death. He claimed to be Joseph's father, but his relationship with the Gruber family was strained and complicated. He'd even attempted to marry Victoria, but Andreas forbade it. Despite the tension, the family lived a secluded life on the farm, seemingly removed from the outside world. But in the days leading up to the murders, something strange began happening at Hinterkaifeck. Andreas told neighbors that he'd found footprints in the snow leading from the forest to the back door of the house, but none leading back. He also mentioned that a set of keys had gone missing, and that he'd heard footsteps in the attic. A newspaper that no one in the household subscribed to appeared inside the home. Tools were misplaced. The family had the uneasy sense that someone was inside the house, or watching it. Still, they stayed. Then on March 31st, the new maid arrived. Maria Baumgartner was brought in to replace the previous housemaid, who had reportedly quit months earlier due to strange noises and a persistent feeling that the house was haunted. It was Maria's first and last day at Hinterkaifeck. That night, something terrible happened. Investigators later believed that one by one, 4 of the family members had been lured into the barn. Likely Victoria, her daughter, then Cecilia the elder, and finally Andreas. One by one, they were bludgeoned to death with what was likely a mattock, a type of pickaxe commonly used on farms. Afterward, the killer entered the house, where he murdered Maria in her bed, and then Joseph in his cot. The crime scene was as disturbing as it was puzzling. The bodies in the barn had been stacked and covered with hay. Maria was tucked in, almost respectfully. Joseph's body had been wrapped in his mother's skirt. But here's where it gets even stranger. The killer, or killers, appeared to have stayed in the house after the murders. Neighbors reported smoke rising from the chimney for days afterward. Food had been eaten. The cows had been fed and milked. Someone had been taking care of the animals. Someone had slept in the beds. And all the while, 6 people lay dead inside. The discovery of the bodies shocked the village. The police arrived quickly, but the investigation was messy. Hundreds of people trampled through the crime scene in the first hours. The farmhouse became the subject of rampant speculation. Who would do such a thing? Why stay afterward? Some suspected Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the man who had once pursued Victoria and claimed to be Joseph's father. He was one of the first to enter the crime scene with other villagers, and his behavior was suspicious. He moved the bodies. He was oddly familiar with the layout of the home. Some said he seemed too calm, but nothing could be proven. And the deeper investigators looked, the more confusing the case became. The murder weapon was never found. Multiple theories, ranging from jealousy to inheritance disputes to supernatural folklore, were floated, but none ever stuck. Over the decades, the case was reopened several times. In the 1950s, even the original skulls of the victims were exhumed for forensic study. But during World War II, they had been lost. Today, no one knows for sure who committed the Hinterkaifeck murders. It remains one of Germany's most haunting unsolved crimes. In the next part, we'll explore the autopsies, the cryptic behavior of suspects like Lorenz, and some of the most chilling details about how the crime was discovered. But for now, as you settle into the mystery, let the quiet of Hinterkaifeck take hold. Was it a crime of passion, a calculated massacre, or something more sinister? The forest keeps its secrets, and Hinterkaifeck remains silent. The murders at Hinterkaifeck weren't just disturbing, they were unnatural. Everything about the crime scene seemed too methodical, too precise. Whoever killed the Gruber family didn't just commit murder, they moved in, they made themselves comfortable, and they left behind something far more haunting than a body count. They left behind questions. When neighbors finally entered the farmstead on April 4, 1922, they weren't even looking for dead bodies. They were looking for signs of life. A week had gone by with no word from the Grubers. The children hadn't shown up to school. No one had been seen in the village. But the animals, the dog, the cows, the chickens, were still alive. The barn had been tidied, and someone was still feeding the livestock. That someone wasn't talking. The moment the neighbors slid open the barn doors, they stepped into one of Germany's most terrifying murder scenes. Lying beneath the hay were 4 stacked bodies: Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and little Cecilia, all bludgeoned to death. The strikes were violent and deliberate, crushing skulls and splintering bone. Some theorized the blows had been delivered with the blunt edge of a mattock, a tool used for chopping wood or digging in hard earth. Whoever did it had patience and control. Inside the farmhouse, 44-year-old Maria Baumgartner, the newly arrived maid, was found murdered in her room. It was her first day on the job. She hadn't even unpacked. Joseph, just 2 years old, was discovered lifeless in his cot, smothered and beaten. But it was what hadn't happened that disturbed investigators the most. There were no signs of a robbery. Valuables were untouched. The cash Andreas notoriously hoarded was still hidden in the drawers. Jewelry, food, even Victoria's savings, all remained. And there was no evidence of a forced entry. No broken windows, no kicked-in doors. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It wasn't rushed or chaotic. It was planned. And it didn't end when the murders were over. Investigators determined that someone remained on the property for several days after the killings. The cows had been milked, the stove had been used, and someone had recently eaten meals from the kitchen. The dog, a large farm shepherd, had been tied up outside, but well fed. The sheets in the bedrooms were rumpled, as if someone had slept there. And the footprints, remember the strange tracks Andreas had noticed just days before his death? The ones in the snow that led to the farmhouse but not away. They weren't imaginary. The police documented them too. The prints came from the edge of the nearby woods, through the snowdrifts, right up to the back door. But after that, nothing. It's as if someone emerged from the forest, entered the home, and never left. at least not the way they came. That detail alone became one of the most chilling aspects of the case. If someone was hiding in the house for days before the murders, listening, waiting, it would explain the footsteps Andreas reported hearing in the attic. It would explain the missing keys, the strange newspaper, the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The Grubers had sensed it, they just hadn't left. Forensic science in 1922 wasn't what it is today. Still, the autopsies offered some insight. Performed in the barn, yes, right there at the crime scene, the examinations revealed that the victims had died from massive head trauma. Victoria's skull had been shattered. Andreas's face was so badly destroyed, it was difficult to identify. 7-year-old Cecilia showed signs of having survived her initial attack. She had torn out clumps of her own hair, likely from pain or fear, before dying beside her mother. Maria and Joseph, found inside, were killed quickly. Some believe they were murdered later, after the killer had waited for the other family members to arrive at the barn, one by one. But who would do such a thing? And why? Suspicion immediately turned to someone close to the family, and one name rose to the top of every list: Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Lorenz was a neighbor. He was also, reportedly, Victoria's former lover, and possibly the father of Joseph. Their relationship had been complicated, to say the least. Lorenz had proposed marriage to Victoria after her husband's death, but Andreas refused to allow it. Lorenz had gone on to marry someone else, only to return to the Gruber home later, insisting that Joseph was still his son. After the murders, Lorenz was among the first to enter the farmhouse with the search party. His behavior was odd. While others hesitated to disturb the scene, Lorenz walked confidently into rooms. He moved the bodies. He unlatched doors no one had opened. At one point, he went into the home's kitchen and commented on how recently someone had eaten there. The implication, he already knew. Was it familiarity or guilt? Some villagers thought he was just traumatized. Others said he was covering his tracks. In one infamous moment, Lorenz opened a door that had been locked from the inside, without using a key. When asked how, he brushed it off. Years later, when questioned again, his explanation changed. Investigators couldn't pin anything on him, but suspicions lingered for decades. Even Lorenz's own son would later express doubts about his father's innocence. But Lorenz wasn't the only suspect. Theories spread like wildfire. Some believed it was a robbery gone wrong, despite the untouched valuables. Others blamed vagrants or soldiers. WWI had ended only a few years prior, and many veterans were drifting across Europe, some mentally unstable. A few theorized it was someone seeking revenge on Andreas for his abusive history. And then there were those who whispered about the supernatural. The region was steeped in folklore. Some said the house was cursed, or that the murders were the work of a Wiedergänger, a vengeful spirit from Germanic legend. Others claimed the devil had visited the farm. Stranger still was the behavior of the Gruber's previous maid. She had left months before the murders, citing strange noises in the attic, objects that moved on their own, and a constant oppressive sense of being watched. She believed the house was haunted. Whether ghost or man, something had taken hold of Hinterkaifeck. In the days after the discovery, police tried everything to make sense of the case. They interviewed over 100 people, searched nearby woods, even drained wells. No murder weapon was found, no fingerprints, no clear motive. In a last-ditch effort, they removed the skulls of the victims and sent them to Munich for forensic examination. Those skulls would never return. They were lost during WWI bombings, and the rest of the family was buried headless. Decades passed. In 2007, a group of students at a German police academy reinvestigated the case using modern profiling techniques. They concluded that the killer was likely someone close to the family, someone who knew the layout of the farm and the habits of the victims. Though they claimed to have a prime suspect, they never released the name, out of respect for surviving relatives. To this day, no one has been convicted, and Hinterkaifeck itself is gone. The farmhouse was demolished in 1923, a year after the murders, and the land was left empty. Grass grew over the ruins, the forest crept closer, but the mystery remains. In part 3, we'll walk through the alternate suspects, including a drifter, a former suitor, and even Victoria's own brother. We'll also revisit what might have been the killer's motive, a theory that could explain both the brutality and the calmness that followed. For now, the only thing that's certain is this: someone watched the Gruber family, waited for them, and ended 6 lives with terrifying precision, and then stayed a while. For over a century, the Hinterkaifeck murders have remained an unsettling enigma. No clear motive, no conclusive suspect, just a quiet farm in Bavaria, 6 brutally slain victims, and an overwhelming sense that someone knew exactly what they were doing. Now let's go deeper, because while many believe Lorenz Schlittenbauer was the likely killer, others disagree. In fact, Hinterkaifeck has inspired a whole host of alternative theories, each stranger than the last. Some are built on witness testimony, others on psychological profiling. A few frankly stretch into the realm of the bizarre, but all of them orbit the same cold, terrifying truth: someone was there, someone waited, and someone had a reason. Let's look at the top theories. Theory 1. Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the jealous lover. We've already discussed Lorenz, the neighbor with intimate knowledge of the farm, a complicated relationship with Victoria, and strange behavior at the crime scene. Many theorists point out how quickly he navigated the home when police were still processing the horror. He opened locked doors without explanation, disturbed bodies, and commented on details that others hadn't yet noticed. Motives. There are a few. Some claim Lorenz was enraged by Victoria's rejection and Andreas's interference in their relationship. Others believe he may have been embroiled in a paternity dispute over little Joseph. Was the child his? Did Andreas refuse to acknowledge him? Or worse, was Andreas actually the father? There are hints that Victoria may have been abused for years. In 1915, she and her father were convicted of incest. Andreas served a year in prison. Victoria, just 16 at the time, received a shorter sentence. The village gossiped endlessly about the family's dysfunction, and Lorenz might have felt both trapped and threatened by the situation. Still, no hard evidence ever tied him to the murders, and in interviews years later, Lorenz insisted on his innocence, but he always lingered in the shadows of the investigation. Theory 2. The Bickler brothers and George Siegel, bitter former employees. Another suspect, former farmhands. Before the murders, 2 brothers, Anton and Karl Bickler, had worked at Hinterkaifeck. So had a man named George Siegel. All 3 reportedly disliked Andreas Gruber, describing him as cruel and difficult. There were rumors that they'd stolen from him, and some claimed that Andreas had threatened them. But could bitterness become murder? George Siegel later told police that he'd hidden a weapon, possibly a mattock, in the attic of the barn, where it mysteriously disappeared. Was he implying someone had taken it and used it, or was he trying to deflect suspicion from himself? There were no clear links between these men and the crime scene, and they weren't seen near the farm during the crucial time frame. But some believe that if the killer stayed hidden in the attic before the murders, it might explain how they had access, and why Andreas kept hearing noises. Perhaps it was someone who knew the farm intimately. Theory 3. Victoria's husband, alive after all. Here's where things turn truly strange. Victoria's husband, Carl Gabriel, was reported killed in World War I in 1914, but his body was never recovered. Years later, stories began to circulate, particularly among soldiers who had returned from Russian captivity, that Gabriel had faked his death and escaped to Russia. The implication, that he returned to Bavaria years later, found his wife living with another man, possibly Lorenz, and snapped. Some prisoners claimed they'd met a man in Russia, who spoke perfect Bavarian, and claimed to be from the Gruber family. Others dismissed it as folklore, but Victoria never remarried, and Joseph's paternity remained mysterious. Could Carl have been alive? Could he have come home, found his wife raising another man's child, and committed the crime out of rage? It's speculative, but chilling. Theory 4. A vagrant or escaped convict. Hinterkaifeck was remote, but not completely isolated. The region had seen its share of wanderers, especially after the economic devastation of WWI. One theory suggested that a desperate drifter had come upon the farm, killed the family, and stayed for a few days before disappearing into the woods. But that theory raises questions. Why stay and feed the animals? Why not steal anything? Why sleep in the house of your victims and tend to their chores? This killer wasn't disorganized. He wasn't frenzied. He was deliberate, which brings us to one of the more terrifying ideas. Theory 5. The killer was already living there. Remember those footsteps in the snow? The maid who quit months before the murders had spoken of strange noises, things moving without explanation, and a feeling of being watched. Andreas himself told neighbors that he'd heard sounds in the attic. Then there was the newspaper they didn't subscribe to, the keys that disappeared, and those singular tracks leading to, but never away from, the house. What if someone had been living in the attic for days, maybe even weeks? The barn's attic was spacious. The house had unused corners and lofts. The killer could have hidden easily, descending at night to observe the family, maybe even interacting with the animals. Then one by one they lured the family members into the barn, stacked their bodies, walked calmly inside, and stayed. It's a theory that keeps coming back, because it explains so much. The timing, the eerie calm after the violence, and the absence of tracks leaving the scene. Some have even wondered if the killer was already in the house during the initial investigation, watching from above. The missing weapon, another haunting clue. The mattock, though never officially recovered during the original investigation, a farm tool resembling a mattock was discovered decades later, hidden in a false wall in the barn. It was heavily rusted, caked in old grime, and matched the type believed to have caused the injuries, but by then it was too late to test for anything conclusive. Whether it was the murder weapon or just another relic of the past, no one can say for sure. Was it a ritual? Some folklorists and theorists believe the killings bore elements of ritual, the way the bodies were stacked, the care taken to cover their faces, the absence of robbery, even the feeding of the animals. It all suggests a kind of ceremony, or at least a killer with rules. In many cultures, covering the face of a murder victim is a sign of guilt. Others interpret it as a sign of respect or remorse. Could this have been personal? And why stack the bodies? Why kill the adults first? Why leave Joseph and Maria for last? If the killer had a plan, they executed it with haunting precision. Public reaction. The people of Bavaria were terrified. For months no one would go near the Hinterkaifeck farm. Children refused to walk the forest paths. Locals avoided speaking the Gruber's names. And to this day, many in the region believe the land is cursed. After the farmhouse was demolished, a memorial cross was placed near where the barn had stood. Tourists still visit, leaving offerings and notes. Some say they feel watched when they approach the site. Others hear noises, rustling footsteps, whispering wind, but no one has ever solved the case. Closing this chapter, in the next and final part, we'll revisit the legacy of the Hinterkaifeck murders, the effect on modern investigations, the psychological profile of the killer, and how the story continues to haunt both true crime enthusiasts and detectives nearly a century later. We'll explore why this case refuses to die, and why some believe the killer was never far from home. The Hinterkaifeck murders were never solved, not officially, not conclusively, not even to the comfort of folk wisdom or local legend, and yet over a century later, the case continues to gnaw at the edges of history. It isn't just the brutality of the crime, or the chilling evidence of a killer living among the victims. It's the silence, the absence of motive, the void where an answer should be. In this final part, we'll look at what's been left behind, the investigations, the cold trails, the modern theories, and the strange way this quiet Bavarian farm became a ghost story with real victims. Let's begin with the legacy of the investigation itself. A case reopened, repeatedly over the decades. The Hinterkaifeck case has been reopened several times, in the 1950s, in the 1970s, and most notably in 2007, when a group of German criminology students, and their professor Andreas Sartorius, decided to apply modern investigative techniques and forensic psychology to the case. They reviewed hundreds of documents, photographs, and autopsy reports. They studied maps, layouts, interviews, and timelines, and after more than a year of analysis, they came to a conclusion. They believed they had identified the killer, but they didn't name him publicly. Why? Because by that time, the suspect was long dead, and the evidence,
while compelling, remained circumstantial. There was no forensic proof, no DNA, no surviving weapon, and no way to prosecute a century-old crime. Out of respect for the descendants, the killer's name remains sealed in university records, and the world is left wondering, how close did we get? Modern profiling. Who was the killer? With no fingerprints, no CCTV, and no witnesses, forensic profilers have turned to behavioral analysis to understand the kind of person who could have committed the murders. Here's what many agree on. The killer likely knew the family, or had a deep familiarity with the farm. They were comfortable on the property, evidenced by feeding livestock and staying after the murders. The crimes were planned, not spontaneous. Luring each victim into the barn in sequence takes time and psychological control. The killer had strong emotions, possibly resentment, rage or twisted loyalty, especially toward Victoria and Andreas. They likely had military experience, or experience with weapons. The wounds were decisive and fatal, but the most chilling profile point, they probably felt no remorse. The methodical cleanup, the days spent on the farm, the eerie calmness, these aren't the actions of someone who snapped in the heat of the moment, they are the steps of someone who believed they were doing what had to be done, or worse, someone who enjoyed it. A community changed forever. Hinterkaifeck was already a strange place, isolated, quiet and wrapped in whispered tales, but after the murders, it became something else entirely, a cautionary tale. Locals spoke of dark eyes watching from the woods. Children dared each other to walk past the site at night. Farmers refused to plant on the Gruber land. One neighbor claimed to hear hammering in the night, years after the house had been demolished. The murders made it clear. Evil didn't just live in cities. It could settle among cows and cornfields. It could wear the face of a neighbor, or hide in your attic. The farmhouse was destroyed in 1923, a year after the killings, but the barn remained for some time. Eventually, it too was dismantled. Today there's nothing left but a grassy clearing, and a simple white cross, placed where the bodies were found. No plaque, no museum, just an absence. Conspiracy theories and occult connections. As with many unsolved crimes, the vacuum of truth has been filled with speculation, and occasionally, outright fantasy. One fringe theory suggests that the killings were the work of a cult, possibly connected to esoteric groups, active in Germany during the 1920s. These theories cite the ceremonial aspects of the crime, the face coverings, the body arrangements, the lack of theft, as possible ritual markers. Another suggests supernatural involvement. Paranormal investigators have visited the site, reporting strange readings, electronic interference, and an overwhelming sense of dread. Even mainstream theorists have floated the idea of multiple killers, a coordinated act by more than one person, possibly to silence the family over something they knew. Financial secrets, wartime betrayals, hidden gold. None of these are supported by hard evidence, but they persist in online forums and midnight podcasts, because the truth, so far, remains just out of reach. Why this case haunts us, so why do we keep coming back to Hinterkaifeck? Perhaps it's the eerie build-up, the signs before the storm, footsteps in the snow, missing keys, whispers in the attic, a newspaper that shouldn't have been there. Perhaps it's the brutality. 6 lives, ended by a sharpened mattock, a toddler beaten in his crib, a maid who didn't even know the family. Or maybe, it's because we're afraid, not just of death, but of silence, of the idea that someone could do something so horrific, so deliberately, and walk away without ever being caught. In the age of forensics, DNA, and digital tracking, we like to believe that every killer leaves a trace, that evil is logical, that crimes have motives. But Hinterkaifeck reminds us, some doors close without explanation. The names remembered, let's remember them, one last time. Andreas Gruber, 63, Cecilia Gruber, 72, Victoria Gabriel, 35, Cecilia Gabriel, 7, Joseph Gabriel, 2, Maria Baumgartner, 44. They were a family like any other, complicated, imperfect, but trying to live quietly in a world recovering from war. And in one night, someone decided they shouldn't. A final thought: if the killer did survive, They lived out their life carrying a terrible secret. Perhaps they moved to another village, married, raised children. Maybe they never killed again, or maybe they did. There's no comforting conclusion here. No justice, no confession, only cold files, rusted tools, and a farm swallowed by time. But Hinterkaifeck lingers, in books, in documentaries, and in the dreams of anyone who stumbles across it late at night. A whisper in the attic, a footprint in the snow, and a question we still don't know how to answer. Who was watching from the woods?
Story 2. The Disappearance of Lauren Spierer. On the surface, it seemed like a typical college night. Bloomington, Indiana. June 3, 2011. The spring semester at Indiana University had wrapped, and the town's energy had softened into summer's slower rhythm. Students lingered in off-campus apartments. Parties spilled into the early morning hours. Music, laughter, and the buzz of young freedom hummed through the night. Among those enjoying it was Lauren Spierer, a 20-year-old fashion merchandising student from New York. Blonde, petite, and bubbly, Lauren was well-liked, active on campus, and close to her family. She had a passion for fashion, a tight-knit group of friends, and a boyfriend who adored her. But by sunrise she was gone. Vanished. No phone, no purse, no trace. And what followed would become one of the most perplexing missing persons cases in modern college town history, haunted by gaps in time, conflicting stories, and a gnawing feeling that someone knew more than they were saying. This is the story of what happened that night, and how a vibrant young woman disappeared into thin air. A girl with big dreams, Lauren Spierer, had everything going for her. Raised in the affluent suburb of Scarsdale, New York, she grew up surrounded by family, friends, and ambition. Despite being born with a heart condition and standing just under 5 feet tall, she never let anything hold her back. She loved fashion, trendy boots, oversized sunglasses, and anything with a bit of edge. Her Instagram was filled with mirror selfies, friends' birthday dinners, and moments of sunshine. She lived life out loud. Lauren chose Indiana University not just for its academics, but because it offered her a balance between independence and community. Her parents had mixed feelings about the distance, but Lauren thrived in Bloomington. She made friends quickly. She went to sporting events. She dated a fellow student, Jesse Wolfe, and they became a close pair. Her life was full of laughter and activity, but like many college students, she also partied a lot, and this would become a key factor in her story. The night she disappeared, June 2, 2011, was a Thursday. Lauren and a group of friends were out that evening, starting off at Kilroy's Sports Bar, a popular campus watering hole known for its lively crowd. It was a warm night, and Lauren had decided to go barefoot, leaving her shoes and phone at the bar, presumably to keep them safe. This detail has always stuck out. Why would she leave her shoes behind? But in the moment, it didn't seem strange. She was just a college student enjoying herself. Lauren left Kilroy's around 2:30 a.m. with a friend named Corey Rossman, a neighbor in her apartment complex. Security footage captured them walking into the Smallwood Plaza apartments, where Lauren lived. But she didn't stay long. What happened next is a timeline of short movements, hazy memories, and a critical window where everything fell apart. The timeline. Minute by minute after leaving Kilroy's, Lauren and Corey walked to her apartment. At around 2:48 a.m., surveillance footage shows them entering. But for reasons unclear, they didn't stay. Instead, they left again, this time walking to Corey's apartment, about 10 minutes away. Somewhere along the way, Corey reportedly got into a brief altercation with another student in the hallway. Witnesses claimed he was punched, possibly suffering a concussion. His memory of the night, he would later claim, was mostly gone after that. They arrived at Corey's place, where his roommate Mike Beth tried to sober him up and get Lauren home safely. But Lauren refused offers to stay or get help. According to Mike, she left the apartment around 4:15 a.m., intending to walk back to her place. She never made it. That moment, 4:30 a.m., is the last confirmed sighting of Lauren Spierer, a barefoot petite woman walking alone through Bloomington's quiet streets, vanishing just a few blocks from home. The morning after, by 11 a.m. on June 3rd, Lauren's boyfriend Jesse became concerned. He hadn't heard from her. She hadn't come home. She wasn't answering messages. He contacted her friends. None of them had seen her since the early morning hours. They checked local hospitals. Nothing. They walked the route she would have taken home. No signs. By mid-afternoon, Lauren's name was being reported as missing to local authorities. The news spread fast. Flyers went up. Police canvassed neighborhoods. Helicopters flew overhead. Drones, dogs and divers searched nearby lakes and wooded areas. Hundreds of volunteers showed up, combing through alleyways, dumpsters and grassy fields. Lauren's parents flew in from New York almost immediately, and within 48 hours, her face was on national news. But despite the speed and scale of the search, one truth quickly became clear. There were no clues, no phone pings, no security footage of her after 4:30 a.m., no witnesses who saw her past that point, no struggle, no screams, no items of clothing found, just a disappearing girl, a tight circle of friends from the beginning. The investigation zeroed in on the group Lauren was with that night. Corey Rossman, Mike Beth, Jason Rosenbaum, another friend who Lauren reportedly stopped by to see after leaving Corey's place. Jesse Wolfe, her boyfriend, was at home and reportedly asleep when she vanished. Police questioned all of them. Some hired attorneys, some refused polygraphs, some were cooperative, others were more guarded. Over the years, Lauren's parents have publicly expressed frustration with what they saw as a lack of transparency from the people who were with her that night. Statements changed, memories were vague, details contradicted, but no one cracked, no one confessed, and no evidence ever linked any of them to foul play. Still, suspicion lingered. Why would a young woman, intoxicated, barefoot, and alone, be left to walk home without help? What exactly happened between 4:15 and 4:30 a.m.? Could something have occurred before she even left that last apartment? Or did something, or someone, find her in those final minutes? Theories begin to brew. Several possibilities were floated early on. Overdose and cover-up. Lauren had a known heart condition. Friends acknowledged drug use that night, including alcohol, marijuana, and possibly harder substances. Could she have died accidentally, and someone panicked, disposing of her body? Stranger abduction. Though rare, late-night abductions by opportunistic predators do occur. Could someone have been watching her? Did a vehicle pull up as she walked? Foul play by friends. Did something happen at Corey's or Jason's apartment that was more sinister than reported? Was she ever truly walking alone at 4:30 a.m.? None of these theories have been confirmed. No charges have ever been filed. The parents who never stopped looking for Lauren's parents, Charlene and Robert Spierer, the pain never lessened. They've held press conferences, organized search events, maintained a blog, and worked tirelessly with investigators to keep Lauren's case alive. They've been vocal, especially about the silence from some of the young men who were with Lauren that night. In one interview, Robert said, "If you know what happened and you're keeping it a secret, you're as guilty as the person who did it." Their heartbreak became public, their grief unfolding in real time. And while they continue to hope, they've also accepted the likelihood that Lauren is gone. But what they haven't accepted is silence. The days after Lauren's disappearance turned into a whirlwind of emotion, suspicion, and dead ends. In Bloomington, Indiana, the local police found themselves overwhelmed by the volume of tips pouring in. Volunteers had combed the wooded trails, riverbanks, and abandoned lots surrounding the university. The search dogs had picked up nothing. Divers came up empty-handed. Every promising lead fizzled into frustration. It was as if the ground had swallowed her whole. But this case was different. It didn't take long before it left the borders of Indiana and became national news. CNN, NBC, and Fox News picked up the story quickly. A young pretty college student, vanishing from a well-lit populated area, was the kind of narrative the media knew how to amplify. Lauren's bright smile and fashionable selfies became fixtures on news broadcasts and missing posters alike. But beyond the headlines, something else was happening, something more sinister. The internet began to whisper. People across message boards, Reddit threads, and early social media platforms started asking their own questions. And with those questions came theories, many wild, some cruel, and a few that clung close to a darker truth. Some speculated that Lauren had overdosed on drugs, and that her friends, fearing arrest or blame,
had hidden her body. They pointed to inconsistencies in the stories told by the men she was with, especially Corey Rossman and his roommate Mike Beth. Others raised questions about Jason Rosenbaum, the last known person to see Lauren, and wondered whether something had happened at his apartment before she supposedly left at 4:30 a.m. There were whispers about surveillance footage conveniently missing or footage that had never been made public. There were also suggestions that Lauren had fallen prey to a stranger, someone lurking nearby as she walked barefoot through Bloomington's quiet streets. A predator, someone who saw an opportunity. Her parents, Robert and Charlene Spierer, were now thrust into the role of full-time investigators. They moved into a nearby hotel, held daily press briefings, and begged the public for help. Robert in particular became a central figure in the case, calm, composed and fiercely determined. He never raised his voice. He didn't speculate. He simply asked for the truth. And yet, the longer the silence stretched, the more haunted he became. There were moments when it seemed they were close. A local landfill was searched in the early weeks after Lauren's disappearance. The operation kept quiet to avoid public attention. But again, there was nothing. Search dogs, cadaver dogs, even psychic volunteers offered their services. The family accepted help from private investigators. They hired retired FBI agents. They spared no expense. But Lauren never appeared. Instead, rumors began to shift into something more toxic. On campus, students whispered that Lauren had partied too hard, that she had made reckless choices. Some people seemed to dismiss her disappearance altogether, as if her decisions somehow justified her vanishing. Online, strangers criticized her character, scrutinized her photos, her social life, even her appearance. Anonymous posters called her another blonde girl who drank too much. They treated the story like a mystery novel instead of a real family's nightmare. Charlene Spierer pushed back against this narrative. She reminded the public that Lauren was a human being, a daughter, a friend, someone who had dreams. She wasn't a cautionary tale. She was a person, and someone, somewhere, had to know what happened. The case received another jolt of energy when celebrities began to take notice. Actor Scott Eastwood tweeted about Lauren's disappearance. News anchor Nancy Grace covered the story multiple times. There were candlelight vigils not only in Bloomington, but in Scarsdale, and other cities around the country. The awareness remained high for years, fueled by true crime bloggers, forums, and YouTube channels that dissected the timeline again and again. But time is a cruel opponent. The first year passed, then 2, then 5. Each anniversary brought back the same footage. Lauren laughing with friends, walking barefoot through a bar, vanishing into the night, and each year brought the same questions, unanswered. The Bloomington Police Department never stopped the investigation, but they quietly admitted that leads had grown cold. At one point, they said publicly they believed Lauren had died shortly after vanishing, but they couldn't prove it. There was no evidence, no confession, no body. One lead briefly gave her family hope. A tip suggesting that Lauren's body might have been discarded at a construction site, or buried under a concrete slab. Investigators brought out ground-penetrating radar and heavy machinery. They examined the foundation of a nearby apartment complex. But again, nothing. Even so, Robert and Charlene never gave up. Years later, Robert wrote an open letter to the person responsible. It wasn't an accusation, it was a plea. He asked them to consider the pain Lauren's disappearance had caused, to think about their own family, and to finally come forward. He asked for peace, not vengeance. The letter didn't produce any confessions, but it resonated with thousands who had followed the case. People saw it shared on Facebook, on Reddit, and in true crime circles. In a world quick to turn tragedy into entertainment, Lauren's parents reminded everyone that behind every missing person case is a family trapped in limbo. There was one more disturbing theory that began to circulate in later years, a theory some believe, but has never been proven. It centered on the idea that Lauren had been abducted and trafficked. While it's rare, it's not unheard of for college-aged women to be targeted for human trafficking. Advocates pointed out that Lauren's vulnerable state, intoxicated, alone, without a phone or shoes, made her an ideal target. Her disappearance without a trace, with no evidence of a struggle, fit certain patterns. Some said she may have been taken across state lines within hours, that she could be alive, trapped, hidden away. Her family didn't rule it out, but without any proof, it remained just another question in a case defined by them. Over the years, other missing persons cases would come and go in the news. New faces replaced Lauren's on the front page, but for the Spiers, and for those who have followed this story closely, she never left. Lauren's face still appears on billboards in Indiana. Her name still trends on social media every June, and her family, more than a decade later, still waits for a phone call, a knock at the door, something, anything that might bring them closure. In the next part of this story, we'll explore the impact Lauren's disappearance had on the culture of college campuses across the country, how her case has shaped how students think about safety, and what it says about the systems meant to protect them. The story of Lauren Spierer didn't just echo through news headlines and police reports, it sent ripples across college campuses all over the United States. Her disappearance struck a deep and uncomfortable chord. For parents, it was a chilling reminder of how quickly safety could unravel. For students, especially young women, it changed how they walked home at night. And for colleges, it exposed a glaring truth. Beneath the bright lights and security pamphlets, many campuses were woefully unprepared for real danger. Indiana University took immediate steps. Security patrols were increased. More lights were installed in high-traffic areas near campus. Student groups organized safety escorts, community watches, and late-night buddy systems. University officials gave statements of support. But there was a tension in the air, an acknowledgement that these gestures, while well-meaning, came too late for Lauren. Her case wasn't the first of its kind, nor would it be the last. But something about the circumstances of her vanishing, so sudden, so complete, forced students to rethink everything. The walk home from a party, the trust given to acquaintances, the assumption that help was always nearby. It became common to hear girls say, "Text me when you get home," or "Share your location with me tonight." Lauren's story had seeped into the culture, even though her friends and family didn't want Lauren to become a cautionary tale. That's exactly what she became in the eyes of many. It wasn't fair, but it was real. And for many universities across the country, it served as a painful wake-up call. In student centers, flyers bearing Lauren's face stayed up for months. Eventually, they faded or were replaced, but her story lingered in whispers. Some dorm race made it a point to bring up her case during orientation meetings. And online, students began trading stories about similar moments when things could have gone wrong. The truth is, most college campuses have long histories of women disappearing, being assaulted, or simply never making it home. Lauren's case brought those quiet fears to the surface. There's also the complicated legacy of her disappearance in the true crime community. Her story became one of the internet's earliest viral missing person cases in the age of social media. It's a strange, bittersweet thing, how people hundreds or thousands of miles away can feel connected to someone they never met. On Reddit, YouTube, and dedicated forums, armchair detectives pored over every public detail of her final night. They analyzed timelines, created maps, and debated theories. Some of them were kind, thoughtful, and respectful. Others were not. There were entire threads speculating about Lauren's behavior, her drinking, her clothing, her friends. Some people accused her of reckless choices, others of being involved in drugs. Theories got more elaborate with time. Some thought there was a larger cover-up involving prominent families in Bloomington. Others suspected the police knew more than they were revealing. And in every corner of the internet, someone claimed to know what really happened. But the truth is, no one does, at least not officially. And every speculative post, every accusatory comment, felt like another weight on the Spierer family's shoulders. They read most of it, they had to, because any one comment could be the one that held a grain of truth, a hint, a clue, a name. Meanwhile, police continued their work quietly. Over the years, they confirmed that over 3,500 tips were investigated. More than 100 people were interviewed, but without physical evidence, without surveillance showing the critical moment she vanished, there was little to go on. Bloomington police were not inexperienced, but they weren't miracle workers either, and as time passed, the likelihood of a confession, or a discovery, grew slimmer. Despite everything, Robert and Charlene Spierer never gave in to bitterness. Their public statements remained calm, measured, and focused. They didn't lash out, they didn't point fingers, they simply asked people to come forward. Privately though, they struggled. In interviews, Charlene once described the haunting quiet of Lauren's empty bedroom, the clothes still neatly folded, untouched. The voicemail Lauren left on her mother's phone weeks before her disappearance, still saved, still played from time to time. The photos that brought more pain than comfort. One of the most enduring mysteries of the case lies in those early hours, between 4:30 a.m. and sunrise, the time when Lauren was supposedly walking back toward her apartment. If she left Jason Rosenbaum's apartment at 4:30 a.m., as he claimed, barefoot, and without her phone or keys, where was she headed? Her apartment building was a short walk away, well lit, but she never arrived. No security footage shows her entering. No witness recalls seeing her on the sidewalk. How does someone vanish in such a narrow window of time? The possibility remains that Lauren never left that apartment at all. That idea, that the last person to see her might have misremembered, or lied, haunted many who followed the case. Jason said she left, but no one else saw her, and police were unable to confirm whether Lauren ever stepped out onto the street again. Jason was never charged. Neither was Corey Rossman, or Mike Beth, or anyone else involved that night. They all lawyered up quickly. Some refused polygraph tests, others took them. The results were never made public. There's a frustration that comes with a case like this. The sense that everyone involved knew just a little bit more than they admitted. That the truth wasn't miles away, buried in a forest, or dumped in a river. It was just a few words unsaid, a few details withheld. For Lauren's family, there's a particular kind of pain in this uncertainty. They don't know if their daughter is alive, if she suffered, if she's at peace. That ambiguity becomes a kind of purgatory, one with no end. Yet in the years since, Lauren's legacy has grown into something larger than the tragedy itself. Her name has been attached to safety initiatives, awareness campaigns, and outreach programs. Indiana University's campus is different now, safer, more alert, and Lauren's story continues to be shared, not just because it's unsolved, but because it's a human story, one that reminds us how easily lives can change in a moment. Some believe Lauren's case will one day be solved, that someone, maybe years from now, will come forward, that a deathbed confession, or an overlooked piece of evidence will break the silence. Others fear the truth was buried long ago, protected by people who have already moved on. But the story remains alive, not only because people remember her, but because they refuse to forget. In the next and final part of Lauren Spierer's story, we'll reflect on how this case has endured, the psychological toll on families of missing persons, and what justice can mean when no one is held accountable. Time is often thought of as a healer, a great equalizer, that dulls even the sharpest wounds. But in the case of Lauren Spierer, time did something different. It stretched the silence, it deepened the questions, it turned her absence into something almost mythic, a ghost that haunts not only Bloomington, Indiana, but everyone who's ever come to know her story. More than a decade has passed since Lauren vanished in the early hours of June 3, 2011. Each year since then has added another layer of distance, not closure. Her family still keeps her memory alive through public statements, foundation work, and an unwavering belief that someone knows the truth. But justice, if it exists in this case, remains just out of reach. And that's the quiet horror of unsolved disappearances. The door never truly closes. There's no body to bury, no final words, no last embrace, just an open space where a person used to be, and the gnawing ache of what might have happened. The Lauren Spierer Foundation, set up by her family, continues to fund efforts to locate missing people and raise awareness about safety. It's one of many ways her parents have channeled their grief into something constructive. But even those efforts are marked by a certain stillness, a quiet understanding that closure may never come. Because what does justice even look like in a case like this? Is it a confession, an arrest, a conviction, or is it something less definable? Acknowledgement, remorse, the simple act of finally knowing. For some families of the missing, the discovery of remains brings peace. Others say it doesn't help at all, that the real pain is not just in the not knowing, but in the knowing too late, that learning your loved one was harmed, or discarded, or forgotten is its own kind of agony. In Lauren's case, the theories still hang in the air like smoke. Was it a tragic accident, covered up in panic by friends who didn't want to face the consequences? Was she the victim of a random act of violence by a stranger watching from the shadows? Or is there a darker network at work, human trafficking, abduction, something orchestrated and hidden? We may never know, and perhaps that's the most disturbing part. Bloomington, for its part, eventually moved forward. Students graduated, new freshmen arrived, many unaware of the ghost story that once gripped their campus. The bars reopened, the streets filled again with students walking home in the early hours. Life continued, as it always does, but beneath the surface, there's a quiet reverence. Ask the locals, and they'll tell you, Lauren's name still carries weight. In Scarsdale, New York, where Lauren grew up, her memory remains vivid. Old classmates still share posts each June. Friends post pictures with heartfelt captions. Her high school occasionally honors her in small ways. But even there, people wrestle with how to speak about her. She's not quite a cautionary tale, not quite a symbol. She was just a girl, a daughter, a student, a friend, and that's perhaps the part that hits hardest. Lauren didn't do anything extraordinary. She didn't climb mountains, fight wars, or change the world in some dramatic way. She went out for a night with friends. She laughed, she drank, she lost her phone, and then she vanished. Her story is not remarkable because of what she did. It's remarkable because it could happen to anyone. To every parent who sends a child off to college, Lauren's story is the nightmare they push down late at night. To every student who walks home alone, keys clenched in hand, her story is a whisper of what could be. And to every person who's ever loved someone deeply, the idea of losing them with no explanation is unbearable. The FBI still lists Lauren's case as open. Bloomington police say it's active but inactive. That is, it remains unsolved. But without new leads, there's little they can do. Over the years, dozens of rumors have surfaced. Bodies found across the Midwest have been tested. Skeletal remains discovered in forests or near highways have raised temporary hopes. Each time, Lauren's DNA is checked. Each time, the results come back negative. And each time, the Spiers must relive the pain all over again. Robert Spier once said, "Someone knows something. Someone knows what happened to Lauren." It's a simple statement, but a powerful one. Because for all the unknowns, that is the one constant truth in this case. Someone does know. Someone out there, whether it's one person or several, holds the key to the mystery. They may live in Bloomington. They may have moved away. They may be living quiet, ordinary lives, but they exist, and they're still silent. Lauren's story has been told in podcasts, documentaries, news specials and books. It's been dissected and reassembled by countless internet sleuths. Yet the center of the story remains empty. No one saw her die. No one has found her body. No one has been charged. And so we are left with a name, a face, a timeline, and a void. But perhaps that's why her story continues to resonate. Because while most crimes offer an ending, this one offers only echoes. While most missing person cases fade from public view, Lauren's has endured, not just because of the mystery, but because of the person at its center. A girl who laughed easily, who studied textiles and fashion, who had a summer ahead of her, and a life she never got to finish. She is not a myth, not a case file, not a Reddit thread. She is Lauren, and until the truth is known, her story will remain open, unfinished, unanswered, and deeply disturbingly human.
Story 3. The Skeleton Under the Bed. The quiet horror of Anthony Sowell. The air was thick with heat in Cleveland's Mount Pleasant neighborhood. The summer sun pressed down on the pavement, bending the streets into a slow, shimmering haze. It was 2009, and something was wrong. At first, it was just a smell. Neighbors noticed it drifting through the breeze, foul, sour, hard to place. It would come and go. Some thought it was a nearby sausage factory or garbage left out in the sun. But there was something else beneath it. Something heavier, rotten, like something dead, left too long under layers of decay. People complained. They called the city. The health department checked the sewer lines. Nothing turned up. Weeks passed, then months. The smell persisted, but no one knew what was behind the door of the house at 12205 Imperial Avenue. Not yet. That house didn't look like a place where horror lived. It was run down, sure, but no more than the other homes lining the block. Peeling paint, boarded windows, a broken fence, but not unusual in a part of town where poverty had taken hold. It was just another house. The man who lived inside, Anthony Sowell, was quiet. Sometimes odd. He rarely spoke to neighbors. He walked with a limp, carried plastic bags. He was polite, even friendly at times, offering neighbors beer or a cigarette. People mostly left him alone. No one guessed what was happening inside. It wasn't until September 2009, when a woman came forward with a terrifying story, that the truth began to crack open. Her name was Latundra Billups. She had known Sowell socially, seen him around the neighborhood, talked to him a few times. One evening, he invited her over for a drink. She agreed. That decision almost cost her life. She told police he attacked her, strangled her until she lost consciousness, then raped her. When she woke up, bruised and terrified, she managed to escape. She ran from the house barefoot, bloodied, and shaking. She went to the police. This wasn't the first time someone had accused Sowell of violence, but this time, the authorities took it seriously. They obtained a warrant to search his house. It would be days before they executed it, but the clock had started ticking. When officers entered 12205 Imperial Avenue in late October 2009, they were hit by the smell immediately. It wasn't garbage. It wasn't sewer gas. It was death. They found 2 bodies on the 3rd floor. One of them was lying in a shallow grave made of dirt and blankets. Another was stuffed in a crawl space under the stairs. The search expanded. They found a skull in the basement, a jawbone buried in the backyard, more remains wrapped in plastic bags, hidden behind walls, under the floorboards. In total, 11 women. 11. Each one had vanished between 2007 and 2009. Most of them had criminal records or struggled with addiction. Many had been dismissed or ignored when they were reported missing. Now they were numbers in a growing body count. Their names would take time to recover. Their families, those who were still looking, would need to be told. And still the neighbors hadn't known. They hadn't heard screams, hadn't seen blood, hadn't guessed that one of the worst serial killings in recent American history had happened just feet from their porches. Anthony Sowell was arrested within hours of the search. He was quiet, almost gentle. He denied nothing. At first, but behind his silence, lay years of manipulation, violence, and a terrifying pattern that no one had fully connected. Anthony Sowell was not a stranger to crime. In 1989, he had been convicted of kidnapping and rape. He served 15 years in prison, then was released in 2005. The law required him to register as a sex offender. He did. He lived openly, right there on Imperial Avenue, but no one monitored what he did inside that house. His victims came willingly, often invited in with offers of alcohol or companionship. Many were marginalized, poor, struggling, forgotten. That may be why no one connected their disappearances, why they slipped through the cracks, why their killer could hide them in plain sight. Even now, years later, it's hard to imagine the weight of that house. 11 women, 11 lives taken, 11 families shattered, and for years their bodies lay just feet away from children playing in the yard next door. It's a story that should have made national headlines for months. And it did, for a little while, but it faded faster than other, more sensational cases. Some believe it was because the victims were black, poor and struggling. Others say it's because the crime was just too horrifying, too large for people to truly grasp. But if you listen to the families of the women lost, you'll hear the same pain, the same grief, the same desperation for answers. They weren't just statistics. They were mothers, daughters, sisters. They had names: Tonia Carmichael, Tishana Culver, Crystal Dozier, Imelda Hunter, Michelle Mason, Kim Yvette Smith, Nancy Cobbs, Diane Turner, Talacia Fortson, Janice Webb, and an 11th woman, whose remains were too decomposed to fully identify at first. Their faces lined the walls of community centers. Their names were read at vigils, but they would never return home. Anthony Sowell's trial would come in time. So would outrage, media attention, protests about police negligence, and calls for systemic change. But in the quiet beginning, it was just a smell, a neighborhood's unease, a door kicked in, a secret uncovered, and behind it all, a man who looked ordinary, who smiled, who drank beer on the porch, who carried plastic bags down the stairs. In the next part, we'll step deeper into Anthony Sowell's past. Who was he before the killings? What shaped him? And how does someone become capable of burying so many victims under their own roof, without a word of guilt? Before the bodies, before the smell, before the police tape and media trucks, and rows of solemn faces holding candles, there was just Anthony Sowell. He was born in 1959, in East Cleveland, Ohio, into a household that would shape the darkest corners of his mind. But calling it a household might be too generous. Sowell lived in a place where cruelty was common, and silence was survival. His mother, Claudia Garrison, had 7 children of her own, and raised 4 more, her sister's children, after the sister died. That made 11 kids, packed into a small house with peeling wallpaper, and a dim kitchen, where meals were often sparse and tempers short. According to later testimony, the house was filled with chaos, physical abuse, emotional neglect, and fear passed around like a shared plate at dinner. Anthony didn't speak much about his childhood, but others did. One of his nieces later told a reporter that she was tied up with belts and whipped, sometimes for hours. Sowell, she said, was part of it. He joined in. Even as a child, he learned how to dominate the vulnerable. When he wasn't being beaten, he was watching others be beaten. One pattern emerged clearly: pain and control were tangled together in the air he breathed. Despite the harsh environment, Sowell managed to graduate from high school in 1977. A few years later, in 1981, he joined the U.S. Marine Corps. On paper, he looked like a man turning his life around. He trained at Camp Lejeune, served as an electrician, and was even awarded medals for good conduct and marksmanship. His service took him to North Carolina, South Carolina, and Japan, but beneath the surface, the darkness never left. Fellow Marines later said he was standoffish, that there was something off about him, nothing they could pinpoint, just a quiet unease. Sowell left the Marines in 1985, returning to Cleveland with new skills and a hauntingly blank slate. He got odd jobs, working in a factory, living off disability checks, drifting through life without any strong connections. By 1989, the demons inside him were no longer content to stay quiet. That year, a 21-year-old woman told police she'd gone to his house for a drink. Once inside, Sowell choked her, tied her up, and raped her repeatedly. She escaped, barely, and went to the authorities. Sowell was arrested and charged with kidnapping, rape and attempted rape. He pleaded guilty and received a 15-year sentence. But this is where the story begins to twist in a way that would have horrifying consequences. 15 years later, in 2005, Anthony Sowell was released from prison. He moved into the house on Imperial Avenue, a home he inherited from his late stepmother. It was a narrow, deteriorating 2-story house with a small backyard and boarded windows, a place forgotten by time, a place where secrets could stay hidden. Under Ohio law, he was required to register as a sex offender, which he did. His name was in the system. He was monitored at first.
But like so many other former offenders, he faded into the background. No ankle bracelet, no regular check-ins, just a quiet man on a broken street. And then women started disappearing. It didn't happen all at once. There were no big headlines. The first was Tonya Carmichael in 2007, a mother, struggling with addiction, yes, but loved. She vanished, and her family searched, but police didn't prioritize the case. They told her daughter, she's an adult. Maybe she just left. Crystal Dozier disappeared next. Then LaShanda Long, then Michelle Mason. Women vanished, one by one in the same neighborhood. Most were black. Most were poor. Some had prior drug charges. Their disappearances didn't make the evening news. No Amber Alerts. No press conferences. Anthony Sowell knew this. He knew who would be missed and who wouldn't. He invited women to his home with the promise of alcohol or companionship. Some were vulnerable. Some were homeless. Some were simply down on their luck. Once inside, he would strangle them, not always quickly. Sometimes with his hands, sometimes with a rope. Sometimes he'd revive them only to strangle them again. One woman said he laughed while she struggled. And then he would wrap their bodies in plastic sheets or garbage bags, and hide them under floorboards, in shallow graves in the backyard, behind walls. On the third floor, where the smell was unbearable, he used lime to try and mask the odor. The horror wasn't only in what he did, but in how long he got away with it. Between 2007 and 2009, at least 11 women entered that house, and never left. And during all that time, Sowell carried on with a kind of eerie normalcy. He walked the streets. He waved at neighbors. He drank beer on his porch. He even had a girlfriend. Yes, a girlfriend. Her name was Laurie Frazier. She was the niece of Cleveland's mayor at the time. She lived with Sowell for years and later claimed she had no idea what was going on. She said she thought the smell came from the sausage factory nearby. That Sowell sometimes said it was the pipes, or maybe a dead rat in the walls. But what she didn't know, or couldn't admit, was that the man she loved was building a tomb around her. That death lived in the next room, and still the system failed again. In 2008 and 2009, multiple women escaped from Sowell's home. They went to the police. They told their stories, how they were choked, beaten, raped, how they barely made it out alive. But somehow, the cases didn't stick. The women weren't considered reliable. Some had addiction issues. Some were sex workers. The system looked at them and didn't see victims. That indifference cost lives. It wasn't until LaTundra Billups survived, and gave a detailed account in 2009, that officers took action. It took them days to act on the warrant. But when they finally entered the home, everything changed. The bodies, the smell, the press, the outrage, the community, long ignored, erupted in grief and fury. How could this happen? How could someone be so monstrous, so methodical, and so ignored? The families wanted answers. The city launched internal investigations. Critics accused the police of failing to take missing black women seriously. Neighborhood watch groups were formed. Activists marched, but nothing could bring back the lives lost inside that narrow house. Anthony Sowell was arrested on Halloween weekend in 2009. His mugshot showed a man with tired eyes and a faint smile, as if relieved, as if the secret was finally over. In the next part we'll follow the trial, how prosecutors built their case, how the city wrestled with justice, and how the families of the victims stood in courtrooms and faced the man who took everything from them. By the time detectives began removing bodies from 12205 Imperial Avenue, the truth had become impossible to ignore. The house was not just a crime scene, it was a mass grave. News trucks swarmed the neighborhood. Families of missing women gathered outside the caution tape, some already fearing what they were about to hear, others clinging to the last thread of hope. The smell had been there for months, if not years. Neighbors had complained, people had whispered, but it wasn't until the moment authorities finally stepped through the door that the unimaginable became real. Inside, officers found the first 2 bodies on the 3rd floor, wrapped in sheets and garbage bags. Then another, and another, one buried in a shallow grave in the basement, limbs rigid and face still partially intact. One hidden in a crawl space off the stairs, 2 more in the backyard. 11 in total, all women. Their names had been floating around the neighborhood for years. Disconnected stories, whispers at corner stores and on bus benches. But now they had a single horrifying center. Anthony Sowell. The forensic team worked around the clock, trying to match remains with DNA profiles. Some bodies were so decomposed, they had to be identified through dental records. In some cases tattoos. In others only fragments could speak for them. The victims' families stood outside in folding chairs, waiting for updates. Some wept quietly. Others shouted. The frustration was more than grief. It was fury. Many had reported their daughters, sisters and mothers missing years ago. They had begged the police to take them seriously. And now the city had to face the brutal question, what would have happened if someone had listened? Anthony Sowell, meanwhile, sat in a holding cell in downtown Cleveland. The press called him the Cleveland Strangler, but he barely reacted to the nickname. He was calm, silent. When asked why he did it, he said almost nothing. The absence of emotion was perhaps more chilling than rage would have been. During initial interviews with detectives, Sowell gave vague answers. He admitted to accidentally killing some of the women. He said they were using drugs together, that things got out of hand. But investigators saw through the act. The methodical nature of the murders, the concealment, the attempts to cover the stench, all pointed to premeditation and a deeply disturbed mind. Prosecutors worked quickly. The state of Ohio decided to pursue the death penalty. The grand jury indicted Sowell on 85 counts, including multiple charges of aggravated murder, kidnapping, rape, and abuse of a corpse. The case was set to be one of the largest serial murder trials in the state's history. But the road to trial was slow. Sowell's defense attorneys requested mental evaluations. They argued that their client suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder, that his abusive childhood and time in the Marines had fractured him irreparably. They said he experienced hallucinations, that his grasp on reality was thin. Psychiatrists were brought in. They interviewed Sowell for hours, while he was found competent to stand trial. Many noted his effect was disturbingly flat. He rarely blinked. He didn't cry. He spoke about the murders, the way someone might talk about old furniture they'd moved around the house. Meanwhile, the city tried to make sense of the failure. How had 11 women disappeared, many with families actively searching for them, and not triggered a more aggressive police response? Why did prior reports of sexual assault not result in a deeper investigation? Critics pointed to race, poverty and addiction. These women, they said, had been written off, and that more than anything had allowed a predator to keep killing. City leaders made public apologies. Task forces were created. But for the families of the victims, it all came too late. The trial began in June 2011, almost 2 years after the bodies were discovered. The courtroom was tense, packed with journalists, local officials, family members and curious citizens. Anthony Sowell sat expressionless at the defense table, dressed in a button-down shirt, glasses perched on his nose, looking more like a tax accountant than a man accused of serial murder. The prosecution opened with the 911 call from one of the women who had escaped. Her voice filled the courtroom, panicked, trembling, describing how she had just fled a house of horrors. The jurors listened in silence. Then came the photographs, graphic images of the decomposed bodies found throughout Sowell's home. Some jurors looked away. Others took notes with shaking hands. Over the next several weeks, the prosecution presented dozens of witnesses, crime scene investigators, medical examiners, survivors. They described how the women died, how long they'd been hidden, the similarities in each case, the rope found near the bodies, the ligature marks, the plastic wrap. the smell that permeated every room, but it was the testimony of the survivors that left the deepest impression. One woman, Gladys Wade, told the court how Sowell invited her in for a drink. Once inside, he attacked, choking her, dragging her down the stairs. She fought back, biting and scratching. She escaped, she told the police. But the case was dropped for lack of evidence. Another woman, Vanessa Gay, described being raped and tortured for hours. She begged for her life. Sowell let her go, for reasons no one could explain. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he was testing her silence. Either way, she survived. Each story followed the same pattern. A meeting on the street, an invitation to the house, alcohol, then violence. And if they didn't fight hard enough or run fast enough, they vanished. Sowell's defense team did not deny the murders. Their argument focused instead on mental illness. They called psychiatrists who said Sowell had severe brain damage, possibly from childhood abuse or substance use. They said he lacked impulse control, that he was not capable of premeditated murder. The prosecution pushed back. They pointed to the planning, the concealment, the calculated way Sowell wrapped and hid each body. The smell, they said, wasn't just an unfortunate consequence. It was a warning sign, one that had been ignored again and again. In August 2011, after 6 weeks of testimony and hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Guilty, on all counts. The courtroom held its breath as the judge read the sentence. Death. Anthony Sowell would be sent to death row. Some family members cried, others clapped, but all of them shared the same hollow expression, the understanding that even justice could not undo what had been done. Their daughters and sisters and mothers were gone, buried in garbage bags, reduced to bones, forgotten until it was too late. Anthony Sowell was sent to the Chillicothe Correctional Institution, where he remained for nearly a decade. He filed appeals, wrote letters, maintained that he hadn't intended to kill anyone. But the world had stopped listening. In February 2021, Sowell died in prison from a terminal illness. The official cause of death was not disclosed. He left no confession, no remorse, just silence. After his death, Cleveland began demolishing the house on Imperial Avenue. Bulldozers rolled in early one morning, tearing down the structure piece by piece. The site where so much horror had unfolded was leveled to dust. In its place, a memorial garden was planted, flowers, benches, a plaque with the names of the victims, a place to remember, a place for families to grieve, and maybe for the city to begin healing. But the lessons linger. The women of Imperial Avenue were failed by more than just a man. They were failed by a system. Their stories, now known, speak louder than the silence that once buried them. Even after Anthony Sowell was dead, the city of Cleveland could not quite let go of the horror, not because it was unwilling, but because it was unable. Some stains, once set in the fabric of a place, refused to wash out. The home on Imperial Avenue was gone, but the memories remained in every crack of the sidewalk, every shifting glance between neighbors who now carried the knowledge that something unspeakable had grown in their midst for years. They had walked past that house, laughed within earshot, barbecued just blocks away, all while death rotted behind those walls. It was unthinkable, and yet it had happened. The memorial garden was peaceful, in a way that felt both deserved and inadequate. It was planted with lilies, lavender, roses, neatly trimmed hedges lined the plot. A simple plaque stood in the center, engraved with 11 names: Tonya Carmichael Tasha Turner, Diane Turner Crystal Dozier, Imelda Hunter, Michelle Mason, Nancy Cobbs, Kim Yvette Smith, Janice Webb, Telesia, Forts and Leshan along. They were no longer just faces on flyers or names. They had become symbols of a systemic failure, and of the long shadows cast by untreated trauma, by silence, and by the kind of evil that hides in plain sight. But even as the community tried to heal, deeper questions lingered. Why were they all vulnerable women? Why were their disappearances so easily overlooked? And what was it in Anthony Sowell's mind? What dark mechanism, what private rot had allowed him to see them, not as human beings, but as disposable? Psychologists who studied the case would later describe Sowell as a classic example of a sexually motivated serial killer. He hunted in familiar territory. He selected victims he thought no one would miss. Women who struggled with addiction, women who trusted him, even briefly, because he looked like someone they could relate to, someone who had also been through things. But Sowell didn't just kill, he kept them. He lived among the bodies for days, even weeks. In some cases, investigators believed he returned to the remains long after the act, perhaps to relive it, perhaps for reasons darker still. One of the most disturbing revelations came from the forensics team, which found evidence of necrophilia. Though not confirmed in every case, the possibility shattered any remaining illusion that the crimes had been the result of chance or impulsive violence. There was method here, ritual, a kind of sick reverence. Neighbors would later testify to strange behavior. Some remembered him burning meat on a grill at odd hours. Others recalled seeing him digging in the backyard, shirtless and sweating, even in winter. Most just assumed he was an eccentric, a loner, a quiet veteran, who kept to himself. In neighborhoods where people are used to minding their own business, that kind of behavior doesn't always raise alarms. But perhaps the most haunting realization was this: Sowell had already shown signs long before the murders. In 1989, he was convicted of kidnapping, raping and torturing a woman in his home. She had tried to escape naked through a window. He served 15 years for that crime, and was released in 2005. Less than 2 years later, the disappearances began. The warning signs had been written in bold, yet the system had no follow-up, no long-term supervision. And then there were the complaints about the smell. Neighbors had reported it multiple times to authorities. City workers claimed it was a nearby sausage factory. Others thought it was rotting garbage, but no one had gone inside the house. No warrant was issued. No door was knocked down. Those missed chances weren't just bureaucratic, they were fatal. The trial revealed other gut-wrenching details. Several women had been raped in the exact same spot, the second-floor bedroom, stained with old blood, still faintly smelling of bleach. One survivor described being choked unconscious, waking up hours later with ligature marks on her neck. Another remembered praying out loud, bargaining with God, while Sowell tied her hands behind her back. There was something calculated about the setting. The house had no running water. The electricity was intermittent. He kept the windows shut tight, the shades drawn. It was a prison disguised as a residence, and he was its quiet, orderly warden. As more women came forward with stories of abuse and escape, the number of survivors began to rival the number of victims. Some, like Vanessa Gay and Gladys Wade, became vocal advocates, speaking publicly about what they had endured. Others chose to remain anonymous, their lives permanently altered by a brush with death. One woman described how Sowell had invited her over to smoke crack. She said no, but agreed to walk with him. When they arrived at his home, something didn't feel right. She stepped through the threshold and froze. The smell, the silence, a sense of dread so thick it felt like a wall. She made an excuse and left. She believes that hesitation saved her life. That theme of instinct and near misses ran through many of the survivor stories. They had all at one point stood on the edge of the same grave, but something, a moment of luck or a sliver of awareness, pulled them back. In the years following the trial, the case of Anthony Sowell became a dark milestone in true crime history. Documentaries were produced, books were written, law enforcement seminars dissected every detail, hoping to learn from the city's failure. But for many Cleveland residents, the pain was more personal. They had known the victims, bought candy from their kids, shared bus rides, laughed at block parties, and in the aftermath, they were left not only with grief but with guilt, because evil had lived next door, and they hadn't seen it. The Sowell case also reignited a national conversation about how society views missing persons, particularly women of color. Advocates pointed out that if the victims had been white or affluent, or from suburban neighborhoods, the urgency of the investigations would have been different, faster, more thorough, more public. That conversation led to real changes. Ohio revised its missing persons protocols. Police departments across the country updated how they classify runaways versus potential abductions, but still the deeper issue remained: whose lives are deemed worth saving? Perhaps the most chilling thought is this: if not for the escape of one brave woman in 2009, Sowell might have continued killing. There was nothing in place to stop him, no one knocking on the door, no final clue, just one woman running barefoot into the street, refusing to be silenced. Her name was Shawn Morris. She had come to the house expecting to drink and smoke. What she found instead was the cage, the rope, the terror, but she fought. She screamed. She kicked the door until it broke. And she lived. It was her voice, frantic and raw, on the 911 call that finally tore the veil off Imperial Avenue. Today she is still haunted by what she saw, by what she survived, but she is also the reason it ended. In a quiet corner of Cleveland, the garden on Imperial Avenue still blooms. Some days no one visits, other times, small groups gather, family members, school children on field trips, true crime enthusiasts searching for the real. The air there is different, heavy, but also strangely peaceful. The plaque stands in the center, untouched by time, its surface reflecting the sky above. 11 names, etched in steel. A reminder of what happens when silence is allowed to spread, when warnings are ignored, when the most vulnerable are forgotten. Anthony Sowell is gone. His house is gone. But his story remains, dark, unresolved in many ways, and painful. It is not a tale of madness alone. It is a tale of apathy, of missed chances, of systems that must do better, because behind every monster there are ripples of complicity. And sometimes, the real horror isn't what's hiding in the house next door, it's how long it can stay hidden.
Story 4. The Locked Room. The Twisted Secrets of the Michael Peterson Case. It began with a phone call, one of those late-night gasps that twists time into a knot and leaves the silence humming behind it. On December 9th, 2001, novelist Michael Peterson called 911 from his grand ivy-draped mansion in Durham, North Carolina. His voice was breathless, trembling with panic. He told the dispatcher that his wife, Kathleen, had fallen down the stairs, that she was still breathing, that there was blood everywhere. When paramedics arrived minutes later, they found Kathleen Peterson sprawled at the base of a narrow wooden staircase, her body twisted awkwardly, her head cradled in a pool of dark, drying blood. Michael knelt beside her, shaking, cradling her hand like a man unmoored by grief. But something was off. The blood wasn't just beneath her. It streaked the walls, it speckled the steps in rising patterns. Her scalp bore lacerations, deep, jagged ones. 7 in total. Not scrapes, not bruises, cuts. The scene didn't look like a fall. It looked like a war had taken place on the staircase. From that moment on, what could have been an unremarkable domestic accident twisted into something far stranger and darker, a mystery that would unravel over decades, drawing in forensics experts, family members, and a global audience enthralled by the unfolding drama. Michael Peterson was no ordinary husband. A former newspaper columnist, Vietnam veteran, and novelist, he had run for mayor of Durham once. His home, a sprawling southern Gothic mansion nestled among trees, projected a quiet wealth, a kind of prestige. To many, he and Kathleen were the perfect intellectual couple, educated, elegant, with children from previous marriages, all living under one roof in what seemed like a blended family success story. But that image, like so many things in this case, would not survive scrutiny. In the first hours after Kathleen's death, the assumption was accidental fall. After all, the staircase was steep, narrow, and dimly lit. She'd had wine that night. Maybe more. Accidents happen, even to the elegant. But then came the autopsy. Dr. Deborah Radish, the pathologist assigned to the case, noted something disturbing. The lacerations on Kathleen's head, 7 in total, were inconsistent with a typical fall. There were no skull fractures, no brain swelling, no defensive wounds on her arms. The wounds were deep, but not the kind that came from blunt force trauma alone. Instead, they suggested something else, something sharp, yet not bladed, something that had struck her again and again and again. The medical examiner ruled it homicide. From that point forward, Michael Peterson's world began to close in. Police began treating the mansion not as a home, but as a crime scene. Evidence was collected, photos were taken, and slowly threads began to unravel. First there was the blood. Forensics experts used luminol and discovered blood patterns inconsistent with a passive fall. Blood on the staircase wasn't pooled, it was sprayed. Some had been wiped, smeared. Spatter analysis suggested blows, not a stumble. Then came the discovery of Michael's computer. Investigators found that just days before Kathleen's death, he had been engaging in online conversations with young men. Some messages were flirtatious, others were explicitly sexual. It became clear that Michael had been hiding a secret life, one Kathleen may or may not have known about. To the prosecution, this was motive, not jealousy, necessarily, but the threat of exposure. They theorized that Kathleen had discovered Michael's secret, that a confrontation had followed, that in the heat of the moment, perhaps during an argument at the top of the stairs, Michael snapped, and that what followed was not an accident, but a calculated attempt to cover up murder as misfortune. But Michael insisted he was innocent. He claimed Kathleen had gone outside to take a call that night, and had returned looking tired. They had both had wine, he said, and were relaxing by the pool. Later she'd gone inside while he stayed out. He found her like that, broken and bloody, when he finally walked in. There had been no fight, no argument, no secret revelation. The defense argued that the staircase was dangerous, that she may have had medication and alcohol in her system, which affected her balance, that the lacerations on her head could have come from a fall onto the wooden molding. Still, jurors couldn't shake the images. The crime scene photos were brutal, the blood too much, the wounds too precise. Then came a twist no one saw coming. As the trial ramped up, investigators unearthed a chapter from Michael's past. Years earlier, he had lived in Germany with his first wife and their children. While there, the family had become close with a neighbor named Elizabeth Ratliff, and in 1985, Elizabeth was found dead at the bottom of her staircase. The parallels were chilling. She too had died from head injuries. She too had been alone in the house with Michael shortly before she died. Her death had been ruled accidental at the time, but now suspicion crept back in like a whisper. The prosecution pounced on it. They argued that Elizabeth's death wasn't a coincidence, it was a rehearsal, a trial run, that Michael had gotten away with it once, that he had seen the effectiveness of a staged fall, and that he had repeated the act, decades later, with his wife. Elizabeth's body was exhumed from her grave in Texas. The pathologist who performed the second autopsy revised the cause of death from accidental to undetermined. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was enough to cast a long, sinister shadow. The trial dragged on for weeks. Witnesses were called. Experts debated blood patterns and wound geometry. The jury listened, tight-lipped, as Michael sat in the defendant's chair, stone-faced and unreadable. Finally, in October 2003, nearly 2 years after Kathleen's death, Michael Peterson was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, and for a while it seemed the story had ended. But as always, the Peterson case refused to stay quiet. Years passed. Appeals were filed. The case drew attention in France, where a documentary crew began filming what would become The Staircase, a project that would span nearly 2 decades, and several episodes, shedding light on behind-the-scenes details, procedural missteps, and fresh evidence. In 2011, nearly a decade after his conviction, a bombshell dropped. Joan Diva, the SBI blood spatter analyst, whose testimony had been critical in convicting Peterson, was found to have misrepresented evidence in numerous cases. His work was deemed unreliable. The credibility of his analysis, especially his conclusions about the blood at the scene, was called into question. Based on this revelation, Michael was granted a new trial in 2011. He was released from prison and placed under house arrest while awaiting retrial. Then in 2017, after 16 years of legal battles and shifting narratives, Michael Peterson entered an Alford plea, meaning he maintained his innocence, while acknowledging that the prosecution had enough evidence to convict him. He was sentenced to time served and released permanently. He was a free man, but the questions remained. What really happened that night? In 2001, was it an accident, a freak confluence of circumstances, a tragic fall magnified by blood thinners and alcohol, or was it murder, hidden behind the geometry of a staircase and the calm demeanor of a man who knew how to lie? To this day, no one can say for certain. The house on Cedar Street still stands, though the staircase has been replaced. Kathleen's memory lives on in her sisters, who continue to insist that justice was never truly served. Michael, now an old man, lives in relative obscurity. His once grand home has changed hands multiple times. The documentary has become a Netflix staple, turning the case into global fascination, and the staircase, narrow, wooden shadowed, remains one of the most unsettling symbols in modern true crime. A locked room, a pool of blood, a husband, a secret, and a question that refuses to die. The more time passed after Kathleen Peterson's death, the less clear everything became, and that was the strange, maddening truth about the case. It wasn't one that gave answers, it gave mirrors. Every piece of evidence seemed to reflect a different theory, depending on where you stood. The more experts were brought in to clarify, the more they disagreed. In 2003, the jury had heard from prosecution bloodstain expert Joan Diva, who painted a compelling picture. Kathleen was beaten, likely with a fire iron from the Petersons' home. He pointed to the blood patterns, high-velocity spatter on the walls and ceiling, cast-off arcs on the stair risers, and spots in areas where no accidental fall could have projected. To Diva, this was unmistakable. She was struck multiple times. And then there was the blow poke. This was the supposed murder weapon, a slender, hollow fireplace tool, given to the Petersons years earlier by Kathleen's sister Candace. For months it had been missing. The prosecution claimed it had been used to bludgeon Kathleen, then disposed of. But during the trial, almost like a twist from a stage play, the blow poke reappeared. It was discovered in the garage, dusty and cobwebbed, but not bloody, not damaged. The defense argued this was clear proof. No murder weapon, no murder. But the prosecution countered with something more psychological. They argued that Michael Peterson had used his intelligence to manipulate everything, that he had the foresight to stage a scene, anticipate suspicion, and play the grieving husband with precision. He was, after all, a writer, a master of narrative. If anyone could write himself out of a crime, it was Michael. Still, the inconsistencies were hard to ignore. How had Kathleen ended up with 7 lacerations on her scalp, and no skull fracture? How had so much blood pooled and sprayed if it had been just a fall? The crime scene was soaked. Some experts said the blood loss measured in liters. The defense explained it this way. Kathleen had been taking Valium and drinking wine. She had high heels on, and was known to move fast, even when tired. A slip on the steps could have made her hit her head multiple times on the molding and hard edges. If her heart was still pumping during the fall, and after, she would have bled heavily. To those willing to believe in an accident, it made sense. But to others, it didn't hold up, especially not when the shadow of Elizabeth Ratliff loomed so large. Her death in 1985 in Germany was too close in detail, too chillingly similar. Though Michael was never charged in that case, the exhumation and revised autopsy, suggesting homicidal violence, added eerie weight to the prosecution's theory. After Kathleen's death, the 2 Ratliff daughters, whom Michael had taken custody of after Elizabeth died, stood by him. They were among his most vocal supporters, even after the verdict. But not everyone in the Peterson circle was as steadfast. Kathleen's sisters, particularly Candace Zamperini, were resolute. They believed Michael had murdered their sister in cold blood. Their testimony was emotional, sometimes raw. Candace once said in court, "I trusted you.
We all did. And you betrayed all of us. This wasn't just a legal case, it was a family torn apart, with truth a casualty in the crossfire. Still, what shook the case to its core wasn't just family testimony or forensics. It was the fall of Joan Diva. Years after Michael's conviction, a review of Diva's work uncovered a pattern of misconduct. He had exaggerated his credentials, claimed experience he didn't have, and worst of all, withheld evidence in multiple cases. In Michael's trial, he had shown the jury dramatic blood tests to simulate cast-off patterns, tests done with pig's blood and spatter recreations. But Diva hadn't shared contradictory results with the defense. This bombshell led to Michael Peterson's release in 2011, after nearly a decade behind bars. But the retrial didn't come right away. In those years of legal limbo, Michael remained under house arrest. He lived in a small apartment and avoided public life. The man who once lived in a 3-story mansion now wore an ankle monitor and answered to a curfew. During this time, the Staircase documentary captured his every move. Originally aired in 2004 by French filmmaker Jean-Javier de Lestrade, it began as a quiet look into the trial, but over the years, it grew. More episodes were added. As developments unfolded in real time, the camera kept rolling. What began as a true crime documentary evolved into something stranger, a portrait of a man caught between freedom and suspicion, a chronicle of a justice system bending, breaking and bending again. The documentary made Michael famous in a different way, no longer a novelist, but a character in a drama he couldn't rewrite. Some viewers believed his innocence. They saw a man grieving and railroaded by bad science. Others saw a cold, calculating killer who'd fooled the system once and might do it again. Then in 2017, Michael made a decision that would divide people again. He took an Alford plea. This rare legal mechanism allowed him to maintain his innocence, while acknowledging that the state had enough evidence to convict him. It was, in essence, a compromise. He avoided another trial, and the state avoided the risk of a full acquittal. But emotionally, it left no one satisfied. Kathleen's family saw it as a final insult. Michael's supporters saw it as a strategic move, not an admission of guilt. And everyone else was left once again, wondering what the truth really was. Today Michael Peterson is in his 80s. He lives quietly, away from public life. His children, fractured by years of trauma, remain divided in their loyalties, and the Staircase, the one that started it all, it's been rebuilt, stripped of its dark history and painted over. But for those who know the story, its shadow remains. For all the evidence, all the testimony, all the years, there remains a single unanswerable question. Was Kathleen Peterson's death a tragic accident, or a masterfully concealed murder? The Alford plea didn't close the book on Michael Peterson. It flipped the last page and left the ending unwritten. Legal scholars debated its meaning for years. Was it a sign of guilt masked by clever lawyering, or a reflection of a flawed justice system that forced compromises where none should be needed? Michael himself remained mostly silent. He rarely spoke publicly about the case, except through his writing. His novels took on darker, more introspective themes, stories of betrayal, secrets, and the elusive nature of truth. But for the public, the Peterson saga became a case study in the limits of forensic science and the power of narrative. Bloodstain evidence, once considered an ironclad pillar, came under scrutiny. The Peterson case revealed how experts could shape interpretations in ways that suited their theories, sometimes crossing the line into manipulation. Joan Diva's downfall served as a warning. Even in science, bias and ambition could cloud judgment. The defense team, led by attorney David Brooke, became famous for their tireless fight to expose flaws and demand fairness. Brooke once said in an interview, "This case is not just about one man, it's about the truth, and about how fragile that truth can be when it's filtered through fear, anger, and grief." And grief was everywhere. Kathleen's death devastated more than just her family. It fractured friendships, divided communities, and left a void that could never be filled. The sisters, Candace and Cindy Zamperini, became outspoken advocates for victims' rights, forever carrying the pain of their sister's loss. Meanwhile, Michael's children struggled with their own versions of reality. His adopted daughters from Elizabeth Ratliff's previous marriage saw their father as a victim of injustice, while Kathleen's biological children wrestled with doubts and anger. For years this family lived with the impossible weight of uncertainty. Was the man they called father guilty, or was he a casualty of a tragic accident and a flawed system? It was a question with no easy answer, and perhaps no answer at all. The Peterson case also highlighted the profound impact of media in shaping public perception. The Staircase documentary blurred the lines between reality and storytelling. It invited viewers into the intimate spaces of a legal battle, showing both the strategy and the emotion, but it also raised uncomfortable questions about the ethics of filming ongoing trials, the effect on juries, and the power of editing to shape narratives. In some ways, Michael became a character in his own true crime story, both participant and audience. And years later, when Netflix released the Staircase remake in 2022, a new generation discovered the case, fueling fresh debates and renewed interest. Ultimately, the Michael Peterson story endures because it challenges us to question what we believe about truth and justice. It forces us to ask, how do we decide who is guilty when evidence can be twisted? How do we grieve when answers remain just out of reach? And can we ever truly know what happened behind a locked door on a rainy December night? The Staircase may be silent now, but its secrets echo, still whispering that sometimes the darkest mysteries are the ones closest to home. The final chapter of Michael Peterson's story is less about verdicts and more about legacy. His case reshaped how courts handle forensic evidence, especially bloodstain pattern analysis. Today, experts and jurors are more cautious, aware that science can be both a tool and a weapon. Michael's life, meanwhile, never returned to normal. Though freed from prison, the years spent under suspicion left scars deeper than any physical wound. The family fractures remain, with trust shattered and relationships strained beyond repair. Yet Michael continued to write. His later novels echoed themes from his own ordeal, questions of truth, justice, and redemption. His case also inspired countless discussions about the American justice system's vulnerabilities, how bias, flawed evidence, and media spectacle can combine to complicate justice. For some, Michael is a symbol of injustice, a man wrongfully convicted and caught in a system that failed him. For others, he remains a figure shrouded in doubt, a reminder that some crimes defy easy answers. As years turn to decades, the Staircase itself has become a symbol, an eerie reminder that sometimes the most haunting mysteries are hidden in plain sight, behind doors we thought were locked tight. And so, the Michael Peterson case endures in the public imagination, a dark puzzle that challenges us to look beyond the surface and question everything we think we know.
Story 5. The Disappearance of Maura Murray, an enduring real-life mystery that remains unsolved, filled with strange clues and chilling details. On the cold February night of February 9th, 2004, 21-year-old Maura Murray vanished into the snowy woods of New Hampshire. What happened to her remains one of the most baffling and haunting disappearances in recent history. Before we dive deep into Maura's story, if you're joining us for the first time, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe for more chilling tales, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. It helps build our community of curious minds and supports this ongoing exploration of the unknown. Now back to Maura. A bright, athletic nursing student from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, Maura had a promising future ahead. She was well-liked, ambitious, and known for her careful planning. Yet, on that night in 2004, something inside her seemed to unravel. It started with a seemingly routine day. Maura informed her professors she was taking a week off due to a family emergency, a story she had told her boyfriend earlier, but later was revealed to be untrue. Why the sudden need for secrecy? Later that day, she packed her belongings, withdrew a large sum of cash, and drove away from campus in her black 1996 Saturn sedan. Hours later, en route 112 in Woodsville, New Hampshire, a local resident called police after spotting Maura's car swerving and eventually crashing into a snowbank. When police arrived, Maura was nowhere to be found. The scene was puzzling. Her car doors were locked, keys missing, and only her cell phone left behind. What followed was an extensive search of the surrounding area, but no trace of Maura was found that night. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through her community and triggered one of the largest search efforts in New Hampshire's history. What could have driven Maura to abandon her car and disappear into the cold, dark woods in the middle of winter? Had she planned to vanish? Was she in danger? Or had she simply gotten lost and succumbed to the unforgiving wilderness? Over the years, the case has drawn amateur sleuths, conspiracy theories, and countless speculations, yet the truth remains elusive. In this first part, we'll explore Maura's life leading up to that fateful night, examining the clues and contradictions that hint at something deeper lurking beneath the surface. Maura's early life and personality. Born in Hanson, Massachusetts, Maura was raised in a loving family with strong New England roots. She was an accomplished athlete, competing in track and field and cross-country. Friends described her as confident, independent, and deeply private. Though she seemed well-adjusted on the outside, some who knew her hinted at a hidden stress or emotional turmoil. In the months before her disappearance, Maura had been grappling with academic pressure and some personal setbacks. There were also reports of strained family relationships and a recent breakup with her boyfriend. One friend noted that Maura had been making unusual purchases, several bottles of vodka and painkillers, which fueled speculation about substance use or depression. Yet, no one could have predicted that just days later, she would vanish without a trace. The mysterious car accident, the crash site, offers a chilling glimpse into the mystery. Maura's car was found crashed off the road, stuck in a snowbank, with no apparent mechanical failure. Inside, there was a mix of personal items, a half-empty bottle of vodka, a pack of cigarettes, and receipts for purchases made earlier that day. Police noted no obvious signs of a struggle or foul play around the vehicle. However, what puzzled investigators was Maura's absence. Her car keys were missing, and her purse was never recovered. Some witnesses claimed to have seen a woman matching Maura's description walking away from the crash site shortly after the accident. Others suggested she might have been picked up by someone or had wandered into the woods. The area surrounding Route 112 is remote, heavily wooded, and during February, the temperatures can plunge far below freezing. This raises troubling questions. How did Maura survive that night in the freezing cold? Did she seek help from a stranger, or was there something more sinister at play? Initial search efforts. Immediately after the car was discovered, local authorities launched a search operation. Volunteers and police combed the dense forest with search dogs, helicopters scanned the skies, and thermal imaging was employed to detect body heat. Despite exhaustive efforts, no sign of Maura was found. Days turned into weeks, and the mystery deepened. Media attention grew, turning Maura's disappearance into a national news story. Yet, the deeper the investigation went, the more questions arose. Why did Maura's family initially withhold some information from the police? What did the voicemail left on a friend's phone just before she disappeared really mean? And what about reports of strange phone calls made from her cell phone in the days after she vanished? Strange clues and theories. Theories about Maura's fate vary widely. Some believe she voluntarily disappeared, staging her own disappearance to escape personal troubles. Others suspect foul play, perhaps involving an unknown person she encountered after the crash. There are also suggestions that Maura's disappearance was connected to secretive behavior uncovered in her emails and text messages, possibly involving stalking or harassment. Some even speculate that she became the victim of a serial offender lurking in the area, though no evidence has confirmed this. These conflicting clues have only fueled public fascination and frustration. As we close this first part of Maura Murray's story, the unanswered questions linger. What made Maura leave her car? Where did she go in the freezing night? Was she running from something, or running toward a dark unknown? The investigation into Maura Murray's disappearance quickly became a complex puzzle, full of strange evidence and conflicting reports. In this part, we will delve into the key developments of the police inquiry, explore the unusual phone calls and sightings, and consider the early theories that shaped the case. After the initial search failed to find Maura near the crash site, the focus shifted toward piecing together her movements in the days before her disappearance. Police began interviewing friends, family members, and acquaintances to build a timeline. While many described Maura as a normal, if somewhat private young woman, there were a few curious details. One such detail involved Maura's purchase the day before she vanished.
She had bought a one-way ticket to her hometown, Hanson, Massachusetts, but she never took the bus. Instead, she chose to drive hundreds of miles north to New Hampshire, an unusual decision given the distance and cold winter weather. Then there was the voicemail she left on a friend's phone shortly before her disappearance. The message was short, somewhat cryptic, and filled with hesitation. It seemed to imply stress or confusion, but did not provide clear reasons for her sudden trip. This message remains a key piece of the puzzle, and has been analyzed repeatedly by investigators and armchair detectives alike. The phone records from Maura's cell phone added another layer of mystery. In the hours after the car accident, several calls were made and received on her phone, but none from Maura herself. Some calls were to unknown numbers, and some went unanswered. Police examined these calls carefully, trying to trace their origin. Were they from someone trying to contact her, or could they have been attempts by Maura to seek help, but she was unable to speak? Eyewitness accounts also came into play, but these were often contradictory. A few people claimed to have seen Maura walking along the road near the crash site in the cold, alone and dressed inappropriately for the weather. Others said they saw a woman resembling her getting into a car with a stranger. Yet, none of these sightings could be definitively confirmed. One witness, a local man, told police he had seen Maura at a nearby gas station shortly before the crash. He described her as appearing calm but distracted, and he noticed she was on the phone. Unfortunately, this was one of the last confirmed sightings before her disappearance. As police continued their investigation, questions about Maura's personal life began to surface. She had recently ended a relationship, and some speculated this breakup might have affected her emotionally. Friends mentioned she was under pressure at university, struggling to keep up with her studies and uncertain about her future career. At the same time, investigators discovered that Maura had made a few mysterious internet searches on her computer, including topics such as how to disappear and missing persons cases. While this raised eyebrows, some believed these searches reflected curiosity rather than intent. Still, the most puzzling aspect was the lack of any concrete evidence pointing to a clear outcome. No body was found, no confirmed trace of Maura beyond the crash site emerged, and no credible suspects were identified. The media attention added to the pressure on police, and many armchair detectives joined the search for answers. Some believed Maura had staged her disappearance, wanting to escape her life. Others suspected foul play, theorizing she had encountered someone dangerous after leaving her car. One popular theory suggested that Maura might have fallen victim to a serial killer active in the region at the time. This theory was fueled by similarities between Maura's case and other unsolved disappearances and murders of women in the northeastern United States. However, no direct links have ever been proven. Another theory proposed that Maura had become lost in the harsh wilderness and perished from exposure. The woods around Route 112 are vast and unforgiving, especially in winter. Without proper clothing or supplies, survival would have been unlikely. Despite extensive searches, including digging in remote areas, questioning local residents, and reviewing surveillance footage, Maura's whereabouts remained unknown. The case became cold, but the mystery refused to fade. Over time, new details emerged, letters from people claiming to have seen Maura, mysterious phone calls, and even theories involving espionage and secret identities, but none have been substantiated. The disappearance of Maura Murray remains one of the most baffling and haunting true crime mysteries, capturing the imagination of investigators, journalists, and armchair detectives alike. As we conclude this part of the story, the unanswered questions about Maura's fate continue to draw us deeper into the unknown. Who did she talk to on the phone? Did she leave of her own accord, or was she forced into the darkness? In the next part, we will explore the search efforts in greater detail, the impact on Maura's family, and the ongoing efforts by amateur investigators to crack the case wide open. The disappearance of Maura Murray sparked an unprecedented search effort that extended far beyond local law enforcement. Friends, family, volunteers, and even complete strangers joined forces in the hopes of finding her or uncovering clues to her fate. In the days and weeks after she vanished, search parties scoured the dense New Hampshire woods surrounding Route 112. The terrain was rugged, with thick trees, rocky outcrops, and freezing temperatures that made the search even more dangerous and challenging. Volunteers came prepared with snowshoes, flashlights, and even infrared cameras, hoping to detect a sign of life. Despite these massive efforts, no trace of Maura was found. Search teams followed every possible lead, from footprints near the crash site to tips from locals, but the cold forest seemed to swallow up any sign of her. Maura's family was thrust into the media spotlight, their grief compounded by the relentless public attention. They appeared on news programs, begging for information and urging anyone who knew anything to come forward. At times, their appeals led to tips and renewed searches, but the trail always seemed to grow cold. In interviews, family members described Maura as a bright and determined young woman who loved hiking and skiing. They believed she wouldn't just disappear without a reason, fueling hopes that she was still alive somewhere. Yet others in the community were less certain. Some wondered if there had been secrets Maura kept hidden, or if she had been in danger from someone she knew. Rumors swirled about her personal life, though no solid evidence ever emerged to confirm any theory. Amateur sleuths and true crime enthusiasts soon took up the cause, investigating leads and discussing theories on internet forums and podcasts dedicated to cold cases. This modern wave of interest breathed new life into the mystery. One such investigator, who has studied the case extensively, suggested that Maura's disappearance was connected to a mysterious vehicle seen near the crash site. Witnesses had reported a white pickup truck driving suspiciously on the same road that night. Unfortunately, this lead was never fully verified by police. Others focused on inconsistencies in the police investigation itself. Some felt authorities might have overlooked critical evidence or dismissed potential sightings too quickly. The case also raised broader questions about missing persons investigations in rural areas. How well equipped are local police to handle disappearances in isolated wilderness? What challenges do search teams face in harsh winter conditions? New technologies like GPS tracking, drones, and enhanced forensic analysis offer hope for solving cases like Maura's in the future. But for now, the mystery remains. As time passed, Maura's disappearance became more than just a missing persons case. It became a symbol of unanswered questions and unresolved fears. Her story continues to captivate those who seek closure and justice, not only for Maura but for the countless others who vanish without a trace each year. In the next part, we will explore the latest developments in the investigation, how the case has evolved over nearly 2 decades, and what the future might hold for Maura Murray's story. Nearly 2 decades have passed since Maura Murray vanished on that cold February night in 2004. Yet her case remains one of the most enduring mysteries in true crime history. Over the years, new information has surfaced, cold case investigators have revisited leads, and public interest continues to burn bright. But the answers still seem just out of reach. In recent years, advances in forensic technology and investigative techniques have offered hope for progress. Modern DNA analysis and geospatial profiling have been applied to old evidence. Agencies like the FBI have occasionally reviewed the case to see if new leads can be generated. Yet, despite these efforts, no definitive breakthrough has emerged. One of the most promising recent developments came from a renewed interest in the various tips and sightings reported over the years. Amateur investigators have painstakingly cross-referenced witness accounts, phone records, and geographical data, uncovering patterns and inconsistencies that might have been missed in the initial rush of the investigation. Some of these leads suggest that Maura may have been coerced or abducted shortly after her car accident. Others propose she chose to disappear intentionally, perhaps due to personal struggles or unknown pressures. Still others believe she succumbed to the elements in the wilderness, and her remains were never found. Her family remains hopeful and continues to advocate for answers. They have supported cold case units and continue to appeal for anyone with information, no matter how small, to come forward. Their resilience has helped keep Maura's story in the public eye and inspired documentaries, podcasts, and books dedicated to uncovering the truth. Maura's disappearance also sparked broader awareness of missing persons cases in rural areas, highlighting the unique challenges in search and rescue operations across rugged, forested terrain and harsh winter conditions. It has led to calls for better resources, training, and coordination among agencies. The case remains a haunting reminder of how fragile life can be, how quickly things can change, and how even with modern technology, Some mysteries resist resolution. Maura Murray's story invites us to consider the unknown, the gaps in our knowledge, and the human stories behind every missing person. Her disappearance continues to draw investigators, journalists, and everyday people to this day, searching for clues, piecing together the puzzle, and holding on to the hope that someday the truth will come to light.